Buddy, welcome to our fourth week. We're going to be discussing the topic here on critical thinking measures. Critical thinking is important in every aspect of living, therefore, the assessment of these skills is important. For some countries and some learning areas, critical thinking test plays an important role. Example, the State Board of Educator Certification in Texas, USA requires all educator preparation programs to screen for critical thinking skills as part of the admission criteria to be accepted as an educator in the preparation program. University of Texas screens student candidates for critical thinking skills by administering the Cornell Critical Thinking Test. They're not the only ones that also have the Cornell Critical Thinking Test. I know when I was working at American University of Health Sciences, they also use it for their nursing students. So if you're going to be a nurse, you're going to be a teacher, any of those kind of degrees where you're caring about people, you're going to need critical thinking. A student must score above the 20th percentile to be admitted into the educator preparation program. If students score below 20th percentile, he or she must retake the test. Usually these tests are used to assess the student's critical thinking skills. These critical thinking tests consist of short reading passages and multiple choice questions. They ask respondents to perform higher thinking tasks such as making inferences, evaluating arguments, and recognizing assumptions. By scoring at least a minimum score, the students will be exempted from certain level critical thinking cores. Three widely used instruments of critical thinking are the Watson-Glaser Critical Thinking Appraisal, the Cornell Critical Thinking Test, and the New Jersey Test of Reasoning Skills. The Watson-Glaser Critical Thinking Appraisal is mostly widely used with instruments of critical thinking. There are 5 subtests in the WCTGA, and it consists of 80 statements of fact. It requires about 40 minutes to complete. The subtest is interference, recognition of assumptions, deduction, interpretation, evaluation, argument. Interference. It consists of 3 statements of fact that have to be regarded as true. After each statement of fact, there are several possible inferences. The conclusion that some people might draw from the stated facts. The respondent is asked to make decision to determine the degree of truth or falsity. For interference, the respondents asked to mark the appropriate answer on the answer sheet. Recognition assumptions consist of 6 short statements. Each statement is followed by several proposed assumptions. The respondents asked to make a decision to determine whether a person in making a given statement is really making the assumption, is taking it for granted, justifiably or not. For each assumption, the respondent is asked to choose the appropriate answer. Deduction consists of 4 statements of premises, followed by several suggested conclusions. The respondents asked to consider statements as true without exception, then make a decision to determine whether the suggested conclusion is really a conclusion for statements given. Interpretation consists of 6 short paragraphs, followed by several suggested conclusions. For the purpose of this test, all the statements in the paragraph must be regarded as true. The respondent is asked to judge whether or not each of the proposed conclusions logically follows beyond a reasonable doubt of the information given in the paragraph. Evaluation of arguments. This consists of 5 questions. Each question is followed by several arguments. The respondent is asked to determine whether it's strong or weak argument. Advantages of Watson-Glaser Critical Thinking Appraisal. Its application to measure critical thinking in classroom setting. The actual test items have high base validity that they draw upon classroom and general life situations. Cornell Critical Thinking Test. There's 3 types of Cornell Thinking Tests. You have Cornell Class Reasoning Test, Cornell Conditioning Reasoning Test, the Cornell Critical Thinking Test. Cornell Thinking Test is philosophy-based critical thinking test. The test was designed to measure the following skills: deduction, induction, semantics, credibility, prediction and planning experiments, definition, identification of assumptions. The test is available in a 2-level. Level X is appropriate for secondary school, grade 7 and beyond. It has 71 questions. 50 minutes of time limit, contains 4 sections. First section contains items asking for varying, if any information is of a hypothesis. Examiners must indicate whether a particular hypothesis is warranted by the data. The second section measures the ability to judge the reliability of information on the bias of the source and condition which is obtained. The third section measures students' ability to judge whether a statement follows a premises, and the fourth selection involves identification of assumptions. Level Z, primarily for college students, has 52 questions and 50 minutes of time limit. Level Z contains 7 sections. It measures the exam's ability to indicate whether a statement follows premises, deduct equivocal arguments, evaluate reliability of observations and authenticity of sources, judge the direction of support, if any, for a given hypothesis, focus on choosing of useful predictions for the hypothesis resting, define terms, spot gaps in arguments. The New Jersey Test of Reasoning Skills, the test was developed by Shipman, 1983. The test is about 50 item inventory promoting the measure of 22 different skills. We have converting statements, translating into logical form, inclusion, exclusion, recognizing improper questions, avoiding jumping to conclusion, analytical reasoning, detecting underlying assumptions, eliminating alternatives, inductive reasoning, reasoning with relationships, detecting ambiguities, and concerning causal relationships. Identifying good reasons, recognizing symmetrical relationships, categorical syllogistic reasoning, distinguish differences between kind and degree, recognizing transitive relationships, recognizing dubious authority, reasoning with 4 possibility matrices, contradicting statements, whole part and part whole reasoning, and conditional syllogistic reasoning. The weakness of the test: examiners need to have fairly high level of verbal comprehension to understand the score high test. According to Sternberg, 1986, the test is highly verbal loaded, and one might well wonder what extent to which the measure is separable from the general. The CAAP critical thinking test is collegiate assessment of academic proficiency. Critical thinking tests used to measure the skills in clarifying, analyzing, evaluating, and extending arguments. About 60% of the 32 items, 40-minute multiple choice test focuses on analysis of elements of an argument, about 20% covering each of the other areas, evaluation of arguments, and extension of the arguments. We have the CAAP critical thinking test. Content area analysis of elements of arguments, the number is 20, evaluation of arguments is 6, extension of arguments is 6, and that makes 32. An argument is defined as a sequence of statements that includes a claim that one statement, the conclusion follows from other statements. The test consists of 4 passages that are representative of the kind of issues commonly found in college curriculum. A passage typically represents a series of sub-arguments in support of more arguments and uses a variety of formats, including case studies, debates, dialogues, overlapping positions, statistical arguments, and experimental results and editorials. The CAAP measures individual and group achievement to provide greater information for institutional use. The CAAP is assessment of higher order skills, which takes students beyond the recall of facts. Right, it is time for us to watch a video. I think last time I forgot to show you a video. This is the importance of critical thinking in the age of information.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so honored to be invited to speak at TEDx GMC Jammu. But as I was sitting down to plan my speech, I realized I was a bit of a wildcard speaker because my academic training is in engineering and social sciences. So as I was thinking about this, I decided that my approach to you, to making this speech, would not to be to address you as doctors and doctors in training, but as people who are trying to figure out themselves and think about and want to be critically thinking, because that's what I do. I currently teach first-year undergrad students critical thinking at a liberal arts university. And as a teacher, who interacts with young people on a daily basis, I see the things and circumstances that you're going through, right? One of the first things in the semester that I ask my students to do is introduce themselves. And very specifically, I'm asking them to tell me about their goals. What is the objectives that they have for the duration of their time in my course and for the duration of their time in university? And I shouldn't be saying this, but one of my favorite responses come from the quiet, bashful, honest students who just admit to me that they feel like they don't know anything. And what they want more than anything is to learn more and then figure out what they stand for and who they are. And I find this a particularly astute understanding, which holds for all of us. All of us are trying to figure out who we are and what our role in the world is. And in this constant sort of negotiation between the internal and the external worlds, we grow into ourselves. The world has so much to offer us, and we drink it in. There is so much of knowledge, there is so much of ideas, so much to discover. We take it in, it interacts internally with the core of our being, our values, our desires, our objectives, and in turn shapes the things that we do and the things we say. And I have found thinking to be this intermediary process which connects the things we take in from the world to the things that we put out in the world. So one of the biggest lessons that I want my students to sort of take away after class, or after my course, is that one of the first steps to becoming ourselves and going into ourselves is to expose ourselves to the things that are available to us, the things that the world offers us. Cultivate curiosity. Expose yourself to the various things that are available and that have been addressed and worked upon in the world. Right? Lesson number 1, read widely, read deeply. Now, this is all great because in our age, we have so much information at our fingertips, right? There is so much technological progress that has made capturing our physical reality so easily accessible and available. With all this information, we are able to share, communicate, transmit at lightning speed as well. But when you think about it, are we less lost now with all of this information that abounds? It seems somehow that we are faced with this information glut, right? We have all this technology to capture the world that we have, all these facts at our disposal. But does that mean that human problems have gone? Have they disappeared? They haven't. Neil Postman, a sociologist, calls this information glut meaningless, incoherent, contradictory, and just too much. His diagnosis is that all of this information hasn't been tied together, weaved in together to form sort of a coherent fabric that is able to answer the questions that we really seek. What are humans in search of? They want to know, how did we get here? They want to know, what are we working towards? They want to know, what is it that we need to know right now? And what is it that we don't need to know right now? Neil Postman encapsulates this very well. Human beings are looking for moral guidance. They're looking for social purpose. And they're looking for intellectual economy. And all of this information, all the technological progress that has been able to really capture the facts of reality, don't really tell us what to do with these facts, right? The facts in themselves are not instructive. So this is when I step in and I introduced to my students lesson number 2, identify an argument. Now, what's an argument? An argument is the presentation of reasons in support of a claim, right? A claim is a declarative and assertive statement about something that the arguer believes is true. Now, I want you to note that when faced with an argument, you have a response is demanded of you. You can do one of two things. Either you can uphold the assertion and say, yes, this is true, I believe this is true, or you can deny its validity and respond with a counter-argument. Facts, on the other hand, don't demand this of you. Facts are objective reflections of reality, whose existence is independent of our sensory experience. Arguments are tools for persuasion. So you see how they're different from facts. Facts don't demand to be proved. An argument, on the other hand, requires a case be made for it so that you're persuaded that it's true. The danger arises when we are unable to distinguish between facts and arguments. In this age of information, as we have all these facts available, we are faced with so many arguments as well. Everyone's trying to tell us, believe this, or the world is this way, or in one way or another, trying to get us to believe something or another. And the step towards becoming a critical thinker is to be able to distinguish between this and recognize when you're faced with an argument, right? Because if you realize that you're faced with an argument, you'll be primed to be skeptical, and you will look into the grounds on which that argument is being proposed. You will scrutinize it. You will not uncritically uphold it to be true, mistaking it for a fact. So is this the recipe for critical thinking? My students love the first part of this lesson, because as I'm assigning all these readings, they're very quick with questions saying, oh, but does the reader have credentials to say this? Is there a logical fallacy being made in coming up with this conclusion? But then I turn it around on them, and I ask them for their first assignment, and their homework is like filled with scratches and circles and questions, because they are so likely to make generalizations. Being able to recognize an argument does two things. You ask the person who is trying to persuade you for a better case, or you ask them questions as to why I should believe this. On the other hand, you would also become more self-reflective and think about what sort of reasoning you need to provide, what sort of evidence you need to provide in order to bring the other person onto your line of thinking. If you want to convince someone of something, then you will start thinking about what needs to go into making that explanation. It's a two-step process. Now, there's no recipe for critical thinking as such, because critical thinking can be applied in many fields. It's seen in management, it's seen in philosophy studies. There is a subfield in political science as well called critical theory. And what differentiates all of these depends on what the subject at hand deems to be critical. But the way that I have approached thinking about critical thinking is I follow Dewey's definition. He states that critical thinking is the active, persistent, and careful consideration of beliefs and other supposed forms of knowledge in light of the grounds that support it. And what I'm trying to do in my classes is to make sure that the student is reflective, is purposeful, and careful and intentional in the way that they decide to believe the things that they want to believe and what to do with them. Now, the students come back to me at this point. They're like, okay, all of this is grand, question every belief, don't let people take you on a ride, but where does this end? Are we supposed to question everything that is presented with us? And you will be looking at me and you'll be like, we don't have the time for this, right? And these are very good, these are very good points to make, because neither is it possible and neither is it desirable to independently verify the validity of every claim that you're ever confronted with, or to question everything that you believe and start from first principles as to, does this hold, does this not hold? Sometimes you want to delegate this responsibility to expertise and wisdom. So expertise and wisdom that you find to be authorities on a particular subject matter. Now, authority is it's a tricky word, right? Because when you think of someone as an authority on a particular matter, what you're saying is that they have this special access to superior knowledge and wisdom, and you wouldn't subject authorities' thoughts with the same level of scrutiny that you would to anyone else. So this is the third lesson, is that what we want to do is we want to be very intentional with who we decide are authorities on things, because you're giving them the right to tell you about how the world really is, right? You're saying that, okay, this authority, because of their expertise, because of the work that they've done, because of their intelligence, because of whatever reason it is, I have authorized them to tell me about the world in particular ways, and I will not be subjecting them to the same level of scrutiny that there's a deference that's provided, right? You feel obligated as well. You don't want to go against what an authority tells you is true. And the third lesson in critical thinking, as I was repeating, is that you want to make sure that you trust the authority who you're looking for guidance and to tell you about the world. You want to make sure that they're in line with your values, and which will sort of help you critically choose the authorities that you are getting to inform you and tell you about the world. So in sort of conclusion, if what I tell my young students as they're sort of negotiating between the simultaneous pushes and pulls in the world, they're bombarded with all of this information, the world's telling them to do a lot of things, I tell them that keep these three lessons in mind. One is cultivate curiosity, right? There is so much out there. The process of becoming and growing into yourself depends on what you feed your mind as well. So cultivate curiosity, right? Give yourself exposure to all the things that are out there. Secondly, know how to distinguish between fact and argument. This will make you more critical about what you accept, and it'll make you more critical about what you put out in the world as well. And thirdly, be intentional about the authorities that you authorize to tell you about the world. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's go to one. Lost my place again. That each time we meet. Yes, I did that each time we meet. Okay, so we're in chapter 4. Last week we did chapter 3. Okay, credibility. Credibility is really important. One of the first weeks we met, we were talking about ethos, pathos, logos. And remember, ethos is the ethics and the credibility. So we always want to make sure we're the most truthful and honest, trustworthy person that we can be. Students, you will evaluate degrees of credibility. You will assess whether the source is interested versus a disinterested party, access claims in relation to their own observation, experiences, or background. Understanding influences and biases based behind the news, become a better and perhaps more skeptical evaluator of media messages, limit the influence of advertising their consumer behavior. Latin singles. Well, how are you interested in your product? Is it because of certain interest groups you're part of? Phishing, be careful with that. It's a way to employ identity victims for identity theft or credit card fraud. Nigerian, you remember the Nigerian prince? It's a 4 to 19 scam fraud. The internet's long-running scam is still running strong. The other one that people get is that you didn't pay your bill. You need to pay your electricity bill or your phone bill. You may think that you did run out. Sometimes I forget to pay my bill because I have so many bills. I also have so many jobs too, but I sometimes forget and I'll get like a message saying that you didn't pay your bill. Well, it could be true or it could be a scam. So the best thing you do, it also mentions if you like to call us back, you can. So in that case, I usually go to the internet, I go to the website, be like, oh, I did forget to pay my bill. Or that's weird. I don't have that provider. Why are they saying I didn't pay my bill? Because it's probably a scam. Or they got you confused with someone else in the system. But yeah, always be careful. I got one time an email saying my friend was in Ukraine and she needed money to go home. The weird thing is, my friend's not Ukrainian and there's no reason for her to be in Ukraine. She's actually Filipina. So if the email said she was in the Philippines, then I would believe that. But because she's in Ukraine, there's no reason for her to be there. She doesn't have family there and she's not going there as a humanitarian or for work related. So I knew it was a scam. So you always have to be careful. My friend was like, I know I read it. And I was like, what is she doing there? I hope she's okay. And I was like, I read it and I knew it was a scam. Careful when you click on it though, because you don't know if it maybe has a virus. That's another issue. It says right here, if you have an email account, chances are you've received an offer from somebody in Nigeria, probably claiming to be a Nigerian civil servant who's looking for someone like you who's a bank accountant with several millions of dollars. Be careful. I know a young lady, she got swindled $20,000. She met some guy, and I guess she really thought he was something, and she sent the money, and guess what? He took her money, and she never heard from him again. So over invoicing or double invoicing oil purchases otherwise needing laundry outside the country, you'll receive a generous percentage of the money for your assistance, and you will have to help a bit to offset the sending the same money to facilitate the transactions to show your good faith. The scam is sometimes called a 419 fraud after relevant section of Nigeria's criminal code is now celebrating more than a quarter century of existence. It operated in the telephone and fax before the web was up and running. Its variations are creative and numerous. Critical thinkers immediately recognize failure of credibility such offers have and thousands of people have not, and that's a lack of critical thinking skills and simple greed. Hundreds of millions of dollars have been lost in prepositions of this fraud. The claim and the source. Where is the source coming from? You know, if you get that message on your phone that you didn't pay your bill, you know, you can pay online, click this website. Maybe it is true, maybe it's not. I look at it 50-50. I'd rather pay it from my computer and I'll go straight to the website. Or I'll look in my email and see if my bill's there in the email because I usually will ask them to send it to my email too. So if you use a provider like T-Mobile, but you're getting a bill from maybe Mint Mobile or something, or a Boost Mobile, or Verizon or Spectrum, then there's probably a scam there. You want to assess the content of the claim. Incredible claims. Like demons made Jesse cheat on Sandra. Possibly the same ones you got a hold of Tiger Woods. How to tell if you've been abducted by aliens, memory loss, and other symptoms you can tell for sure. Real life and personal observation fails. According to the Innocence Project, a group of New York that investigates wrongful convictions, eyewitnesses misidentifies the single greatest cause of conviction of an innocent person. Of all the convictions overturned by a DNA analysis, witnesses misidentification played a role in the other 75%. Of the first 239 DNA, 62% of the defendants were misdemeanors by one witness. 25% of cases, the defendant was misrepresented by two witnesses. 13% of the cases of the innocent defendant was misidentified by three or more separate eyewitnesses. Even though eyewitness testimony can be persuasive before a judge and jury, it's much more unreliable if we generally give credit for it being. Incredible but true. Believe it or not, these two tables are identical, both in size and shape. You probably have to check with the ruler and a straight edge to believe this here. The illusion was designed by Roger in 1990 and produced with permission by Freeman Company. The illusion shows how easy our observations can be mistaken. In this case, simply because of a perspective. As indicated in the text, many other factors can influence what we see. So it's all about perception, background information. Maybe there's initial plausibility. Do your ears stick out straight? That means you need to perform in public. Look, Obama's ears stick out. That's a claim. Not all that glitters. I know a lot of people like to collect gold and silver. There was something called fool's gold, where it looked like gold, and people got excited and thought it was gold, but then they were really mistaken. It was another mineral that's not worth that much. Whom do you trust? It's all about outward appearances, right? A lot of people, unfortunately, are into looks and image, and sometimes they miss the whole picture. I watched this guy get interviewed about house robbings in the daytime, and he said that a lot of people would like judge and think like maybe you're a homeless bum, that you're going to be the person to rob somebody's house in the daytime. But in fact, it was him that robbed a bunch of houses. He said he dressed nice and he said that he usually would go running, like he's a jogger. And when he went jogging, he get to see the really nice homes. And then he would kind of stake out which ones he thinks he'd want to come and steal from later that day if nobody was home. He said, you got to be careful because it's all about perceptions and judging the way people look. And they would probably judge the homeless guy who's dirty and drunk or high, down on his luck, than him who's out jogging, looking at the different houses and seeing which ones he's going to come back later. So he's pretty much casing them while he's getting a workout. That's just an example. Smoking and not paying attention can be deadly. You have to be careful. So he was smoking. For those headlines, we'll be back at the moment to blow them out of proportion. Government management of the news. There's fake news, and then there's real news. Then there's also like news that repeats itself over and over again. Saving Private Lynch. There's that movie called Saving Private Ryan. Evaluating website credibility, a tip for professionals. Well, it says right here in a study done a few years ago, it was determined that when it comes to evaluating credibility on a website, experts in the field go about it much differently than the ordinary customers. Since we've indicated credibility varies hugely on the web, we must do our best we can in assessing this feature of any website we consider important. Unfortunately, it was shown as a study just mentioned, most ordinarily visitors do much less effective job at evaluating credibility than just people knowledgeable in the field. In particular, while professionals attend most carefully the information given in a website, most of the rest of us pay attention to the visual appeal, layout, topology, color schemes, and animation affect the general public estimate of the site's credibility. 54% comments about their features, whereas the professionals' interest only more quality of the site's references, credibility, and individuals mentioned, and so on. Only 60% of professional evaluators comments do with the website design. What should we take from this? A general rule: don't be taken in by a visually attractive website might be. Flashy design with attractive colors and design features is suitable for information that's backed up by references and put forward by people with appropriate credentials. And of course, you have web checkers, you have stuff like Snopes and Truth or Fiction, factchecker.com, and Political Fact and Consumer Reports. I have to tell you, Consumer Reports, that's good. It can tell you maybe if there's a recall on something. But Snoops is just a couple. Then they end up not staying together anyway. So you gotta be careful, like which web checker you're using. I'm sure they're all really great, but like Snoops Original is still the best site for checking for rumors, stories, and urban legends and other types of strange claims turns up on the web. Okay, so like I said, the husband or wife, so you might think it's biased, right? Now they might have one that bots check. They might say it's not biased because bots are checking it. Advertising, we use advertising to get people excited about our product or service. And yes, we use critical thinking to try to think about what we think the audience might need from us. What would this future consumer or client need from us? The little cartoon says we can't compete on price. We also can't compete on quality, features, or service. That leaves fraud, which I'd like you to call marketing. And when it's not an ad, it's a product placement. All right, so that's the end of that. It's time for another video. Penny for your critical.
I give a second chance again.
August 29th. There was a meme that came out and went viral shortly after Hurricane Harvey made landfall. The meme said that on August 29th, Hurricane Katrina, Isaac, Gustav, and Harvey all made landfall on the same day of August 29th. That is an absolutely amazing coincidence. And it's absolutely not true. But nobody bothered to fact check the meme before they shared it. And it really highlights one of the reasons why we need to learn the skill set of critical thinking. We need to know what critical thinking is, why it's important, and some things that we can do to become better at critical thinking. My journey with critical thinking started shortly after I reported on board at the Navy Senior Enlisted Academy here in Newport, Rhode Island. It's a school that focuses on educating the top enlisted military leaders from all the services, and we focus on things like leadership, communication, and of course, thinking. When I got there, we used the word critical thinking quite freely. We wanted our students to be critically thinking for their assignments, but it wasn't something that we had actually investigated ourselves. So we started asking, can we get a critical thinking class? Can we develop one? And finally, our wish was granted, and I was lucky enough to get volunteered to develop this class. And what I learned when I started researching critical thinking is that I didn't know as much about critical thinking as I thought I did, which really struck me because I had college, I had a degree, and I thought I would have had that critical thinking thing nailed. But what I discovered is critical thinking is far less about our problem solving and much more about analyzing our thinking, finding the flaws in it, and becoming good thinkers. If I was going to define critical thinking, I would say it's the art of taking all of the information that is coming at you from all the mediums that we have, and boy, we've got a lot nowadays, and being able to filter through it, being able to find the facts, find the opinions, and then take the information and make the best decisions we can with what we've got. There are many different parts to critical thinking, but we'll look at biases and dirty tricks today. We all have biases. Most of us, our biases stay at this level down here, this unconscious level. We're not aware that we have them. But one of the goals in critical thinking is to raise our awareness of our biases so that way we know what they are and then we can do something about it. One of my biases reared its ugly head on a recent trip to Disney World. Disney has a wonderful transportation system. They take you from your resort hotel to the theme parks and back to your hotel, so you don't have to worry about driving. It's really designed to alleviate stress. We had a particularly long day at one of the theme parks, and we were waiting at the bus stop forever. And we kept seeing buses for every other resort drive by except for ours. And finally, I see our resort bus coming towards us, and I would get very excited. And then a little bit later, I was filled with this sense of, oh my gosh, this is going to take forever. But luckily, my critical thinking skills kicked in, and I was able to identify why. Some reason I had it in my mind that she was going to do a bad job of loading up some wheelchairs that needed to get put on board. And I thought it was going to take forever, and it was just going to ruin our night. Well, the gender of the driver really has no bearing on whether or not they're going to be good or bad at loading wheelchairs. She did a wonderful job. We were on our way and had a great night, but it really could have ruined my evening. Well, biases are those things that we have internally, but we've also got to contend with dirty tricks. We'll see dirty tricks in discussions, debates, interviews, sometimes even news articles. And the purpose of dirty tricks is to basically win an argument by discrediting or undermining either the person or the argument itself. I saw one recently after President Trump was elected. Bill Nye was on Fox doing an interview with Tucker Carlson. The topic of discussion was climate change. What they were really discussing was how climate change has accelerated, and human activity has helped to contribute to the acceleration of climate change. This is something that most of the scientific community pretty much believes in. But Tucker Carlson was pushing Bill Nye for a particular bit of information. He wanted to know the exact amount of human activity and involvement had increased the rate of climate change. Well, that's something the scientific community hasn't quite figured out yet. But what was happening was Tucker Carlson was using Bill Nye's inability to give that one bit of information to discredit the argument, saying the scientific community, maybe you don't have your stuff together. And if you don't have it on that one number, maybe you don't have it for anything. So knowing a little bit about what critical thinking is important, but why is it important? Why does it matter? So when we don't know what our biases are, we let that drive a lot of our thinking. Our biases can shape many of the decisions in our lives, from who we'll hire, who we'll fire, where we'll live, where we'll go to school. And when we're making important decisions in our lives, we need to know why we're making them, not just base it on this feeling of, well, that feels good or bad, because that's usually our bias talking. And when we're not critical thinking, we've essentially handed over permission for somebody else to do our thinking for us. And that's particularly troublesome when you learn that people are using dirty tricks to win arguments, often not even based on facts or evidence. And then finally, on any given day, if you're scrolling through your social media feed, you can see things like liberals think or conservatives think, lumping people into groups. And what this does is creates this us versus them mentality. And instead of bringing us together, it really divides us. And what we need to do in order to have meaningful engagement and conversation is come together and have that. And generalizations are one of those things that doesn't help us. So after learning a little bit about what critical thinking is, why it's important, you maybe think, well, what can we do? Well, there's a lot we can do right now to improve our critical thinking. We need to look at our schools and what we can do personally. I'm a big fan of school. I would go to school nonstop if it was free. It's not, but that's okay. But one of the things you learn when you love to go to school is that you research a lot of schools and you take a lot of classes. And in all the classes that I've taken, critical thinking is something I'd see in a syllabus, but not a class that I'd actually have to take. We need to start injecting this into our school systems. We need to teach students to learn the difference between facts and opinions, to view the world from multiple lenses, and to ask meaningful questions. And most of us will probably never set foot in a classroom again, and that's okay, because there's things that we can do right now on our own to become better thinkers. Humans are funny people, and one of the things we like to do is we like to find people who agree with us. And when we choose our news sources, we tend to wrap ourselves in the comfortable blanket of, we just found a news source that agrees with everything that we agree with. Well, one of the things we need to do is we need to take that blanket, we need to cast it aside, and we need to, without bias, look at opposing views and see what they have to offer, because often they can be good things. We need to ask questions. See if somebody is trying to push a particular agenda with what they're presenting to you. And one of the most difficult things that we need to do is we have to practice. We can't walk out of here today and say, hey, I sat through a TED Talk on critical thinking. I've got this thing down now. It doesn't work that way. Critical thinking requires discipline and practice, much like the Olympians and Paralympians who represent their countries. They worked hard, they had discipline, and they practiced. Well, in order for us to become stronger critical thinkers, that's one of the things that we need to do. So we need to know what critical thinking is, why it's important, and things we can do in order to be better at it. And so the next time you get that super share-worthy meme or headline article, why not critically think on it before you hit share? Thank you.
Tourists. Tourists that turn into scientists. Tourists taking photos that are analyzed by AI. So researchers can help life underwater flourish.
When I was growing up, I was going to be Wonder Woman. No, it's true. It wasn't just those shiny red boots or those fierce, bullet-deflecting wristbands. What really fascinated me was that magic golden lasso of truth. Wonder Woman could find out secrets and untold stories with the toss of an accessory. It was kind of amazing. As I grew older, I became increasingly fascinated with what people didn't tell me. I didn't have a golden lasso, so I had to figure it out. So when my parents said, no, we won't have a TV in the house, I figured it meant we want everyone in the neighborhood to think we're weird. Because everyone did think we were weird for not having a television. Ironically, it was my parents who gave me my first media literacy lessons. For my mom, deconstructing movies like Cinderella or Flashdance, to my dad deconstructing television commercials, I learned early on to look for that untold story. One time, we were at my Nana's house. She had a TV. And a commercial came on, and it was one of those ads where a man gives a woman this large diamond ring, and she smiles, tears up, and the music swells, indicating that they are going to live happily ever after. My dad turned to me, rolled his eyes, and said, well, I guess I don't love your mom because I never gave her a diamond. It was comments like that that taught me media could be decoded. So from there, really, when you think about it, I think that my fate as a media literacy educator was probably sealed by the time I turned 10. As a media literacy educator, I get to travel the country, teaching students, teachers, and parents how to deconstruct media. At a time when young people are interacting with media for over 7.5 hours each day, it's critical that they have deconstruction questions in their tool belt. And they can ask questions like, what is the text and subtext of this message? The text is what we see, a photograph of a young girl holding hands with an adult. We have 3 colored stripes and other information at the top, and the words reading, writing, color coordinating. The subtext is what we don't see. It's essentially our interpretation. And students bring their own opinions into the classroom, so they can each have their own answer. They love this. Subtexts vary from, hey, she's learning about art, that's great, to, oh, it's so cute, she's dressed just like her mom, to, are they telling us that it's more important for girls to be worried about what they're wearing than doing math? That leads to an untold story, which is, what is the actual saying? Is it reading, writing, and color coordinating? No, it's reading, writing, and what? What is it? Arithmetic, right. Well, not all students know that. They're not the target audience, which is another important deconstruction question. Who is this message for? They research that, come back, and now we can have a conversation about a second untold story, which is that girls are nudged out of math with all kinds of products, like t-shirts that say, I'm allergic to algebra, and dolls that say things like, math is hard. Now the classroom can have a conversation about the collective impact these messages have on our culture, in job interviews, and our economy. Once students know how to deconstruct media, they have gained a superpower. And while they can't see through walls, they can see through ads, sitcoms, and even newspaper articles. Joseph is an 8th grader. He wasn't even participating in class until media literacy was introduced. His reason? Well, it's that media literacy connects school to my real life, so it's something I can use every day. Other students create counter ads on their final day of media literacy class. This is when they take an actual ad and sort of deconstruct it and reconstruct it to highlight the untold story. Here are some examples from across the state. Here, a 6th grader understood how tobacco marketing was impacting their community and really highlights the impact of addiction when they chose to put the phrase, "It's a beautiful struggle." And here, a 7th grader recreated an ad that had originally said, sometimes your eyes are bigger than your mandibles. And it showed an ant carrying this large bottle of alcohol, and they poignantly recreated it to say, sometimes when you drink, you feel this small. Here's an original ad using various techniques of persuasion, including bribery in its offering a 5% cash back, and exaggeration in equating freedom with using a credit card. James Devine, a 9th grader, won our national counter ad contest last year when he flipped the frame on those techniques of persuasion and let us know that maybe, and he let us know that maybe it's 100% corporate manipulation when that revolving door of debt is equated with freedom instead of slavery. Now that I've grown up, I still don't have bracelets that can deflect bullets, but I did get that golden lasso. Now let's make sure that each student gets theirs so that those 7.5 hours that they interact with media become a daily opportunity to connect school to their 21st century real lives.
there are
All right. Okay, just one moment. So critical thinking and reasoning. The important thing is not to stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reasoning for existing. Albert Einstein said that. Critical thinking in your life, personal life, what constitutes a healthy diet, which investment is better for my family and why, personal life, in what ways can I improve our product, how do actions of our company affect others, how about the environment? Academic life, what are some main points of the text? What major should I choose and why? Spiritual life, how do these teachings apply to my life? Are there contradictions in what is being said? Skills you should cultivate, become an active listener, chase answers, actively seek out solutions, don't go in the answer, don't wait for it to come to you, become open-minded. Is it possible that there's multiple correct answers? You might be wrong and why. Try and approach problems from different perspective. Separate emotions from facts. We have thinking and feeling are not the same. Avoid logical fallacies. 2 + 2 is 5. Nope, that's incorrect. But of course, if you're in philosophy, you might say my truth, and your truth is your truth, and we're both of truth. You want to attend class regularly to have active listening skills, take advantage of extra credit opportunities, participate in your discussions, talk with your professors, read textbooks, take notes and outline information, review the notes, and try to put them in your own words. Attend tutoring, it's free. Go to get tutoring at your school. Take the information you have gathered, try it out loud, experiment with it. Why is it relevant? What does it mean? What's the purpose of knowing information? Things to keep in mind. Your perspective. Others have different perspective. It's possible that you're wrong and others are right. Get comfortable with being wrong and learn from it. Consider many different viewpoints. Accept a new explanation, how it explains the evidence better and has fewer contradictions. Think before you act. Separate your feelings from the facts. Am I acting because of emotional impulse or because it's logical? Do I believe something because of the logic behind it? Avoid logical fallacies. A logical fallacy is a misunderstanding derived from faulty reasoning. Avoid contradictions between answers. Is your best answer a logical answer? Does it make sense? Example of logical fallacy is hasty generalization. Cutting people with a knife is a crime. Surgeons cut people with knives, therefore surgeons are criminals. You must be willing to say, I don't know, then be willing to do something to change that. Critical thinking is not driven by answers, it's driven by questions that you ask. Constantly ask questions. Why? Why is population increasing? Is there an abundance of deer to hunt? What? What effect is the increase having the deer population? Where? Where is the population increasing? It's all over the upper Pennsylvania peninsula, or just in located areas, isolated areas. Who's affected by the increase of the populated cougars? Are hunters affected? The wolves? When? When did the increase begin occurring? How long will the increase continue? How? How will we stabilize the cougar population? Problem solving part 1. Problem solving system. Reorganize, list the topic, issues, and main points. Paraphrase, summarize, understand, Put concepts in your own words. Relate the information to what you already know. Restate the information. Hypothesize. Make interpretation of the information based on your understanding of it. This interpretation will be analyzed logically. Problem solving system part 2. Analyze information. Split the information into parts. Figure out how the ideas are related or connected. Ask questions. The why, the what, the where, the who, the when, the how. Compare and contrast information. Recombine information. Using new understanding of the material, put parts you analyze back together. Think of a puzzle. You can put pieces back together. How do the pieces fit? Check hypothesis. See if your new understanding agrees with your hypothesis. Characteristics of critical thinkers. Critical thinkers care for the beliefs to be true and their decisions are justified. That is, care to get it right to the extent possible. This includes the dispositions to seek alternative hypotheses, explanations, conclusions, plans, sources, etc., to be open to them. Endorse a position to the extent and not only the extent that's justified by the information available. Be well informed. Consider seriously points of view other than their own. Inference, induction, moving from specific to general arguments based on observation or experience. Deduction, moving from general to specific arguments based on laws, rules, or widely accepted principles. Gravity example. Critical thinking keywords. Ideally, you should always be thinking critically. However, following the words will identify and critical thinking required. These type of words require comprehension and understanding, but not simple memorization. Discuss, explain, compare, contrast, critique, evaluate, describe, define, enumerate, illustrate, interpret, identify, outline, prove, justify, relate, summarize, and trace. Use techniques found in this presentation to develop your own strategies for critical thinking. Create the size-fits-you approach to develop your own critical thinking. Tailor the concepts to fit your needs. There's no one-size-fits-all approach, and every technique may not work for each of your courses. How do you apply concepts to your coursework and your decision? Thanks. Logic and critical thinking, the way to good reasoning and making good argument. You want to think it twice. Don't take things for granted so easily. Always ask the why question. Try to find the reason for the premises. Why is there a claim? The conclusion can be supported. Examine and evaluate relationship between the reasons and the claim. Self-defeating paradox, the concept of all-powerful God, Zeno's paradox, apparently unacceptable conclusion derived by apparently acceptable reasoning from apparently acceptable premises, Samantha paradox, the liar's paradox, the lawyer's paradox, prisoner's dilemma, Russell's paradox, Barber's paradox, and the lottery paradox. Those are different kinds of paradoxes. What is logic? Logic is non-imperative science. Formal or informal science, logic versus psychology, the laws of thinking, the science of reasoning, the science of argument, the study of methods and principles used to distinguish good, correct from bad, incorrect reasoning or argument, the way to good reasoning, making good argument, and critical thinking. What is an argument? An argument is fundamental structure of reasoning. An argument consists of premises and conclusion. An argument is used to provide reasons for supporting some claim or proposal. Logic aims to study of various forms of argument, and the ultimate goal of logic is to evaluate arguments. What's an argument? An argument is fundamental structure of reasoning. An argument consists of premises and conclusion. An argument is used to provide reasons for supporting some claim or proposal. Logic aims to study of various forms of argument, and the ultimate goal of logic is to evaluate arguments. Standard form of an argument, it could be premise and conclusion. We've been talking about that all along. There must be some kind of supporting relationship between the premises and the conclusion. Premise 1 and premise 2 equals your conclusion. We have two kinds of argument, traditional but mistaken, distinguished between deduction and induction. Deduction, some general principles, particular case. Induction, some particular cases, general principle. Deductive argument is an argument that premises necessarily support the conclusion. We have inductive argument, the argument that premises probably support the conclusion. Evaluating an argument, there are two ways of evaluating argument. Formal logic is used to deductive criterion for evaluating arguments. Formal logic is used in inductive criterion for evaluating an argument. You have deductive arguments, valid arguments, and valid. Valid argument has sound argument, unsound, and good and bad arguments. The good argument, deductive versus inductive. Deductive systems. The truth table methods for evaluating deductive arguments. The formal system of the natural deduction. We have propositional logic, predicate logic, Aristotelian logic, categorical syllogism, and axiomatic system. The inductive systems, methods of analogy and probable inference, legal reasoning, Mills method and casualty, statistical reasoning, probability, and hypothetical reasoning. We have informal fallacies. A fallacy is an error in reasoning. Fallacies of relevance, when an argument relies upon premises that are not relevant to the conclusion and therefore cannot possibly establish the truth. Fallacies of weak induction, when connection between premises and conclusion is not strong enough to support the reasoning. Fallacies of presumption, ambiguity, and grammatical analogy. The uses of logic: evaluate somebody else's argument by exposing structure. Set up your own argument, solve problems and puzzles by answering the why questions, giving reasons. Inference the best through using present evidences, thinking effectively, and making decision wisely. Logic and critical thinking. Why should we become a critical thinker? Be a master of your own life. To ask why is to ask the reasons for some beliefs and opinions. That is to find out the premises for a certain conclusion. To evaluate how reasons successfully support the claim. That is to evaluate how premises support the conclusion. Critical thinker is a truth pursuer, and logic is truth preserving. That's the end of that. Right, so we are in week 4, so I do want to remind you of your assignments. This week for our week 4 assignment, we have the discussion and our weekly assignment. Week 4. Week 4, how do you assess information critically? Do you determine the credibility? That is your discussion question. It can be found on the syllabus for week 4, and this DQ should be about 200 to 300 words. Remember, everything's due by Sunday. Then this week, we're starting on our project for the weeks 5 through 7 and 9. You're going to be working using the decisions at CAVA scenario located in supplemental materials, page 14 of the syllabus. You're going to read and understand and analyze the scenario as you assume the role of NEG, that you have the organization you work for with, which you're familiar with the organization as Alex is representing in addition. Make sure you use the mission and vision statements from the organization you work or your organization that you're familiar with to help you in the decision discussed in the scenario. All right, so that's it for today. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a great day. See you next week.